Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to Sit Heads Meditation Club. My name is John. I help organize this group. Sit Heads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. I like to call us a serious meditation group for non-serious people. Everything we do is free and donation based. And if you want to hang out with us, you can find us at sit-heads.com. sit-heads.com. I would really love to now introduce our wonderful guest, Leigh Brasington. Leigh, I'm going to bring you up. And hey, Leigh, do you mind if I just briefly do like a third person bio of you while you sit there listening to me talk about you? Okay, so here we go. Leigh Brasington has been meditating since 1985 and is the senior American student of the late Buddhist nun, the Venerable Ayya Khema. Leigh began assisting Venerable Khema in 1994, began teaching retreats on his own in 97. He is also authorized to teach by Jack Kornfield, famously of the Insight Meditation Society and Spirit Rock. Leigh is, I think, most renowned for his teaching of the meditative absorptions or jhanas, though he also teaches insight practice. And he has led well over 160 residential retreats throughout the US and Europe. He's done this stuff a lot. He is the author of several books, most famously, I think, the recent Right Concentration, A Practical Guide to the Jhanas, but he has also written Dependent Origination and Emptiness, Streams of Dependently Arising Processes Interacting, say that 3 times fast, and The Gradual Training, the Buddha's Step-by-Step Guide to Awakening. Did I miss anything importantly?
I think that probably covers it.
All right, I could keep going. I'm sure there's more to say.
You
All right.
could throw in that my career was as a computer programmer, and I've billed myself as a hippie computer programmer because that's what they call me in my first job.
The hippie computer programmer. I love it. Where are you based, Leigh? I don't actually know that. Are you in California?
Yeah, I'm in Oakland, California.
Ah, oh, you told me that. That's right. That's a good place for a computer programmer to be. He has an awesome website that makes me nostalgic because he has maintained the sort of classic styling of Web 1.0, which I really appreciate. And it's actually a very rich, like a very content-rich website. Leigh has been very generous in the way that he shares his teachings. And as far as I could tell, a lot of his books are also available for free download on a Dana basis. And then even if you go to the Dana section about the book, it's just him asking you to give to someone else. Find an organization or institution that you like and support them financially. That's what I saw anyway when I looked at your website. So that is the most open-handed expression of Dana from a teacher that I've heard. So that's cool. And yeah, so listen, let's the way that we'll do this, Leigh, as you know, is that you and I will have a bit of a conversation, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Now, I find that when we do this, I inevitably slip into sort of interview mode. But the last time you and I spoke, it was a really delightfully freewheeling conversation. And I'm going to do my best. I hope that we can recapture sort of that energy instead of one-on-one interview. But if it slips into I ask a question, you answer, that's on me, and I'm sorry about that. I'll try and make it a conversation. Um,
No
so
worries.
does it sound okay?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's do it. So, okay, let's just start. Actually, no, I'm not going to start with Jhana. I'm sure that 90% of the interviews you do dive right into Jhana stuff. And I want to start with, I asked you this the last time we spoke, and I'm going to ask you again. What is the stuff that during these sorts of interviews, when you're on podcasts, et cetera, what's the stuff that you wished people asked you about more?
Yeah.
Other than
So,
Jhana?
yeah. So the thing I found the most interesting, the richest vein I've mined, is dependent origination.
Mm,
There's so much there. That's why I wrote a book on it.
yes.
And the first thing I say in the book is this book is incomplete. It's not possible to write a complete book on
Mm,
the subject because there's so much to it. I think if someone fully understood dependent origination, they'd be fully awakened, fully liberated.
yeah.
Uh, but it's a really interesting topic, and there's just so much to it. So, yeah, that's one thing that I enjoy talking about. And it's it's not easily accessible, but it's certainly more accessible if you have a jonically concentrated mind. So it all keeps wandering back to jhanas.
Okay. So, and I want to tie it back to Jhana just because, as a practical matter, a lot of your audience is interested in jhanas, right? They came to you and your work because that's what they're into. You wrote a famously helpful book on the topic and have become something of an authority. I would say that among the sort of like online Dharma scene, the folks that you see on like Reddit or Twitter, you've kind of been the toast of the town for some years now. So people are coming to you for jhana stuff. So the way I
Right,
want to frame this is let's talk about dependent origination. But what I want to know is someone who's interested in jhana, someone who is interested in practicing jhana in the style of Leigh Brasington, what's in it for them? Why should they care about dependent origination? And how, as a practical matter, would they slot this into whatever they're doing in terms of their jhana practice in your style? It's like, why should they
right,
care? And then how do they, as a practical matter, make use of this?
right. So the jhanas are principally a way to sharpen your mind. Uh, you could think of your mind as a knife, and the jhanas are a whetstone to get your mind sharp. The jhanas by themselves are, yeah, they're very cool to hang out, but they're not going to take you all that far.
Hmm.
If you really are interested in, well, liberation, interested in having a life that has less suffering in it,
Yes.
then you're going to need to get a deeper insight into how the world works than we normally have. And what the jhanas are good for is sharpening your mind so that when you do investigate the world, you have a better chance of seeing what's actually happening. It's usually translated as knowing and seeing things as they are,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a little too static. So I want to say knowing and seeing what's actually happening. The
Mm.
thing that underpins everything that's actually happening is dependent origination. The general principle of dependent origination is that everything arises dependent on other things.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, it's talked about this arises dependent on that. If that doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. And this is what we call necessary conditions. So, a necessary condition for the light to be on, yeah, the light switch has to be turned on. It's not a sufficient condition because, yeah, the power plant has to be pumping out electrons, the wires have to be intact, etc. And it's
Ugh.
not the
This is
causal,
reminding me of taking the LSATs, necessary
right?
and sufficient conditions. Ugh,
Yeah,
I
my
shudder.
background is mathematics. That's how I got into computers. So,
Okay.
yeah. So, understanding the necessary conditions for why things are as they are gives you the power, if you can manipulate a necessary condition, to stop something from happening that you don't want to have happen. The Buddha didn't want dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness to happen. And he found a necessary condition that he could turn off, craving. So that's part of dependent origination. That's part of the general principle of dependent origination. But there's so much more to what we can learn by looking at the world through the lens of how things arise dependent on other things. And so that's why someone who's interested in jhanas hopefully will take their jhanically concentrated mind and take a look at dependent origination. I would say I've learned more by investigating dependent origination than any other topic in all of Buddhism.
Hmm. And I know that I think the Buddha himself said that it was like the deepest, it like sort of contains the whole of the Dharma, right? I'm probably butchering this, but that
Yeah.
if you were to
One
see
who
it, that, but
sees
that
the
it's
Dharma,
incredibly profound and hard to understand.
yeah. One who sees the Dharma sees dependent
Right.
origination. One who sees dependent origination sees the Dharma. But it's hard, it's deep, it's profound, and it's by not penetrating dependent origination, this generation has gotten confused and tangled. So
Is
yeah,
that what the Buddha said, or are you about his generation, or are you quoting, or are you literally saying that
I'm,
about this generation?
I'm quoting him, and
Okay.
it applies to this generation.
Ha. All right. Do you mean this generation of meditators, of yogis?
This generation of people on this little ball we call Earth.
All right. Um, so when I hear this, when I hear your explanation, I find myself unsatisfied. And the fault lies with me, I'm sure, not with you, but I still want to, but other people may share my faults. And so I want to nudge because I've had this experience before where I read about dependent origination. Everything arises from causes and conditions. I know that emptiness, in a sense, is kind of a cousin of dependent origination because everything is dependent on causes, conditions, that things don't sort of truly exist from their own side as independent entities. And in that sense, they are empty. So, but then when I hear something like this, my first reaction, and it's not a great reaction, but my first reaction when you say, like, yeah, this depends on that. If this ceases, that ceases. My reaction is sort of no shit. And there's like a it doesn't feel as profound as the Buddha advertised it as, and as you're advertising it. The same way I find this happens with some people with the idea of impermanence, like, oh yeah, nothing lasts, duh. But I know, but at least I've managed to scratch the surface and understand that the insight into impermanence is much more profound than that. It's a deep insight into the fundamental, among other things, the fundamental momentariness and ungraspability of everything. It's not just like, oh, mountains wear down, everyone dies, though that's also useful to reflect on. Um,
Mhm.
but but there's this sense of like, yeah, that's obvious, dude. That's not like a profound thing. And so help me understand its profundity, because it sounds like you're talking about basic causality, which would not be news to most high school students, you know?
Right.
And then also, how does it how does understanding that, which also sounds quite intellectual, translate to, from a meditative dimension, the release of suffering or liberation?
Okay, so I'm going to do the last question first because that's
Cool.
easier,
All right.
right? So once you start seeing the chains of dependent origination, that things are arising on due to other things that are happening, and you find something happening you don't want to have happen, right? Then what can you do about it? Well, sometimes you can trace it back and find some place where you can manipulate. Yeah, I can manipulate this necessary condition, and the whole thing breaks down and it doesn't happen. But a lot of times you find something happening that you don't want to have happen. And the only place you're going to be able to get beyond the I don't want this to happen is in your own mind,
Okay.
right? If the Buddha is correct that all of our unsatisfactoriness arises dependent on craving, and let's just say, to take a random example, that you're not pleased with the outcome of the recent election.
Hmm.
Okay, so uh, yeah, you can't do anything about the election that took place and what this country is facing with the changes that are coming. But you
Right.
can
The,
do
the
something about
necessary or sufficient
adjust.
causes or all of that, those aren't within our control, those
Right.
external causes.
But what is within your control is how you react to this news. Okay, you can get upset, you can cry and scream, you can say it's not fair, anything like that that you want to do, but it doesn't change anything. Or you can realize, okay, I want it to be different than it is. I can't make it different than it is. What can I do so that I can lead my life in a way that doesn't give me a lot of grief, the fact that things are like this? How can I be more unattached to the outcome of what's happened?
Right.
One of the things that I've learned is, okay, going back, remember the movie Do the Right Thing? You know, it takes place in Queens.
I
Surely
know
all of
of
you
it.
know that.
I can't say I've
Yeah,
seen it. Sorry.
yeah, it's a great movie. Well, at the time I saw that, there was an article in the old Inquiring Mind, remember the Inquiring Mind, by Joanna Macy said, and she was saying, don't be attached to the results. So, all right, put the two together. Do the right thing, don't be attached to the results. All right, now what's the right things I can do and not be attached to the results? Well, the right things are to comfort those that are in pain. Maybe I can make them feel better, maybe I can't, but that's the right thing to do. I can educate those, perhaps, that don't understand what's happening. So that's a thing. And so I'm seeing this through the lens of, okay, this person's ignorance is arising because they don't have information. So can I provide them information in a way that they can actually understand it? So it's sort of underpinning everything here. Yes, it's not profound at this level, but if you start taking it deeper and deeper, one of the things that I grew up wanting to know is, why is it all like this? What the hell is going on? And Buddhism doesn't offer that. It doesn't say, oh, we'll explain to you what's going on. The Buddha said, all I teach is dukkha and the end of dukkha, right? But I found by exploring dependent origination, I did figure out what the hell is going on. It turns out there's nothing but streams of dependently arising processes interacting. Subtitle of the book. All right. By
Yeah.
seeing the world not so much as entities, but as processes, I get a deeper understanding of what's going on. By seeing the processes interacting with other processes, I begin to see that there's not a lot of separate things happening. There's not even a lot of separate processes happening. There's a whole bunch of interconnectedness. There's this giant net. It's not that everything is connected to everything. It's that everything is connected to enough other things that there's a unitary net going on. And so my question of what's going on, it got answered.
All
Streams
right,
of
let me
arising
jump in.
processes happening.
Let me jump in on this because there's something I want to seize on here and I want to see if I'm understanding correctly. Because through most of that, I was still like, okay, yes, and because what you sounded like you were describing was dependent origination explains how you might think about intervening in the things in your life or your experience that you do or don't want. Dependent origination would tell you, would counsel, look for the causes that you can affect and affect them. But
Right.
you were able to convey that to me perfectly adequately in 3 minutes just now, which still doesn't explain to me why you need to do a deep study of dependent origination. So let me throw something out and see if I'm onto something at all. So with the insight into impermanence, I had this experience where it all sounded not especially insightful. Everything changes, everything dies, everything ends, the cup is already broken. Okay, cool. We all know that, right? Like maybe people didn't know that 2,500 years ago, but now, we have a basic understanding of science and the sort of loss of heat and entropy, and we sort of all know that. But one, we don't live as if it's true. We know that it's true intellectually, but we're still shocked and horrified when we lose something or something breaks or someone dies. So obviously, down in our bones, we don't have it yet. And the answer to that, or one answer to that, in for instance, one tradition would be to sit and watch phenomena with enough patience and persistence that you begin to see the radical momentariness of phenomena. That will cause you to feel it in your bones after a certain amount of practice and certain insights that arise. You like look until you deeply see the radical impermanence of things. You move past the intellectual understanding. And so then when I heard you describing just now your experience of seeing all things, and especially it sounds like your own subjective experience, and mental experience and constructed experience of the world as this web of interpenetrating processes. It
Mhm.
sounded like what you were describing is that you've done something, perhaps something contemplative or meditative, so that it's no longer an intellectual understanding. You have penetrated to a place where the radical interpenetration of things is apparent to your experience,
Right.
non-intellectually, in the way that perhaps a Vipassana practitioner can come to experience impermanence as apparent and imminent, for them. Um, am I understanding that right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Once you get deep, I mean, once you get deep enough into it, it's like, oh, wow, I never thought about it like that. And you start seeing it differently. Now, sitting here, not knowing everybody's background, trying to put it out there so that I can take you to that depth, you're asking a lot here. But
Sure.
I can give you some cues to help you look in that direction. I can point you to my book and say, yeah,
Right.
read the
One
book.
cue would
It's
be read the
free.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's free. Maybe it'll help. One of the things that comes along if you go in that direction is you start realizing that mostly what you're doing is interacting with your conceptualization of the world. If it's nothing but streams of dependently arising processes all connected together, it's too big for our little pea brains to take it all in. So in order to get enough to eat, find a place to sleep, etc., we have to break it into chunks that are manageable. We call these things nouns,
Right.
but it's verbs out there. All right, so we're chunking everything, we're conceptualizing everything, and we're believing our concepts are the accurate picture of what's going on. But it turns out all of the disconnect in the United States these days is because people have different concepts. They're looking at the same thing or similar things, and they're conceptualizing it different. And so we're caught in believing our concepts as opposed to recognizing that our concepts are an attempt to deal with the fact that there's nothing but streams of dependently arising processes interacting. I'm just going to say SODAPI from now on, because
Yeah.
that's the abbreviation of that. So it's
Got it.
all SODAPI. We take in bits and pieces of it, we conceptualize it, and we work with the concepts, and we believe that my concept is the accurate picture of what's going on. And the other guy believes his concept's the accurate picture, and our concepts don't match.
Yeah.
And so, how can we communicate when we're conceptualizing the world in a different way? This is the challenge here.
Mm. Hmm. So it sounds like dependent origination, understanding it, is not merely about recognizing the power and importance of causality and bringing about sort of gross change. It's about seeing through. I mean, if in the end it's about suffering and freedom from suffering, it
Mhm.
sounds to me like what you're describing sounds very connected to the idea of not self or no self. It sounds very
Mhm.
connected to the idea of emptiness. It sounds like what you're saying is that if you can come to see in a readily apparent way, if you are experiencing things as dependently arising, not just understanding intellectually that they're dependently arising, but if you could actually come to experience things that way, then the sort of contraction around concepts, the sort of um the sort of
Fixation,
what do you say?
fixation on
Yeah,
concepts.
yeah, and taking these fluid verbs and condensing them into nouns so we could deal with them the way that we feel we need to, that is at the root of a lot of our suffering. And so there's a
Right.
direct release of a lot of that burden if you can come to see the world not intellectually, not conceptually, but actually experience the world in this dependently arising way that you're describing. So it sounds like there's a direct path, like the direct result of that would be a massive reduction in suffering. It sounds like it's a form of very deep, viscerally experienced insight. Would you say
Yeah.
that's right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really hard in 15, 20 minutes to give you the depths that are
Of
necessary. You're going to
course.
have to do the
Of
practice.
course.
But
Of
yeah,
course.
that's where it'll go. And in fact, it can go even deeper. So there's one of my favorite suttas, which is middle length number 38. Um, and I'll skip most of it. There's a long discussion on dependent origination in there. And then the Buddha finally comes to say the following: knowing and seeing in this way, that is, in terms of dependent origination, would you run back to the past wondering, was I? What was I? Being what? What did I become? No, venerable sir, say the monks. Knowing and seeing in this way, would you run to the future wondering, will I be? Won't I be? What will I be? What will happen to me in the future? No, venerable sir. Would you be, knowing and seeing in this way, would you be inwardly confused about the present, wondering, am I? Am I not? What am I? Where is this being come from? What will happen to it? No, venerable sir. Monks, are you saying this just because I'm your teacher? No, venerable sir. Are you saying this because you know it from your own experience? Yes, venerable sir. Good monks, it's good that you know this from your own experience. So the number one problem that people are facing is death. I mean, it's the only thing we know about the future. We're all going to die. So how are you going to come to terms with that? Well, what the Buddha is saying is to take a look. And if you truly deeply understand dependent origination, you're not seeing an entity here that's going to die.
Yeah.
You're seeing an intersection point of a lot of streams of dependently arising processes interacting. That's all that's going on. And so the question about was I in the past, what will I be in the future, these just disappear because you are no longer conceiving of yourself as a separate entity or anything. You're just seeing, yeah, a bunch of stuff happening and it gets intersected at this point, and the senses pick up some of it and try and express it, and oh yeah, this food needs to be eaten and things like that. And so this takes you out of the self and towards not self, if you can actually understand this. And this again is something that comes out of dependent origination.
Mm. Now, how would one reckon with, and then I want to talk about some other stuff if we have the chance, though I could probably just talk about this for another hour, but we're not going to do that. But I feel like someone might hear that, the idea that, well, there's nothing to die, right? The self that you thought was has never been.
Mhm.
So nothing's going to be lost. You haven't lost anything. It wasn't there. But someone might respond to that, well, but there is consciousness. And this consciousness, which is peculiar to me, will end. This is here, and then it will not be. How would you, and they could present that as a counter argument to death, there's nothing lost. So what would you say? They would say, well, there's reason to be concerned about that, or at least to acknowledge that there's something vanishing. What would you say to that person?
I would say that there are two ways of looking at reality. There's the relative perspective on reality, and in a relative perspective, there's me, and I'm in Oakland, and there's you, and you're in New York, and so forth. And then there's the ultimate perspective. The only way you're going to find freedom is by looking at the world from the ultimate perspective. As long as you're trapped in looking at the world only from the relative perspective, there are going to be things like your car breaks down, uh, you ran out of your favorite food, the wrong person gets elected to whatever office. Stuff like this is going to happen. You're not going to find freedom there. The
Yeah.
only way you're going to be able to find freedom is to also be able to look from the ultimate perspective. So, from the relative perspective, it's me. I'm 75 years old. I'm probably going to die within, yeah, a decade or two. I don't think I'll make 3 decades. Okay. But can I actually have that information and not have it freak me out? Can I actually look at the world from another perspective and see, oh, yeah, well, I'm not dead yet. I have a chance to actually do something that maybe is of benefit to other people who are not dead yet.
Mm.
And so I write some books, I teach a few retreats, I try and do what I can. And that you have to have both perspectives. I wish I'd known we were going here, I'd have brought a bowl in. Suppose I have a bowl, okay, just a regular old soup bowl. Is it concave or convex? Come on, which is it? Those are opposites. How can it be both? Well, it depends on your perspective, right? You want to put soup in the soup bowl, you better take the concave perspective. You want to elevate a tea candle, well, it's going to work better with a convex perspective. It's not that the two perspectives are exclusive, or they don't exclude the other one. It's just different perspectives. And we need to be able to operate in the world looking at from the proper perspective. And so sometimes it's very important to look from the dependent origination perspective and see the empty nature of everything that's going on. And sometimes, like if you're trying to cross the street, I highly recommend looking from the relative perspective. You can't say the bus is empty and step in front of it and expect to live, right? So you've got to operate with both perspectives.
Yeah,
One
unless
of the
unless you're
things,
Deepama or someone, and then you could pass right through it.
maybe so, but I know I can't, so I'm going to operate from
Fair
both.
enough.
And dependent origination is one of the things I've found that helps me the most to operate from the ultimate perspective when that's the appropriate perspective to take.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. So this was a very rich conversation that I enjoyed a lot. I hope other people will benefit from it. And I think it's a nice complement to, of course, to everything that you do around jhanas that maybe people are more familiar with.
Mhm.
I want to talk about that a little bit because I'm curious. We had this conversation a little bit. We started down this road, but we talked about how sort of in the online Dharma world, it's like there's almost a completely separate scene, right? There's like this sort of IMS crowd and their sort of spiritual cousins and descendants. And then there's like the sort of weird, wild and woolly world of like Dharma Reddit, Dharma Twitter, all the message boards. And it's like a completely different set of like teachers who are sort of most widely read and worked with. Like there's I feel like on like Dharma, like the online Dharma world, people aren't really talking a ton about like Sharon Salzberg, Jack Kornfield, even though like they are obviously like preeminent giants in certain other contexts. But in that online Dharma world, you're kind of the goat. Like, it's Leigh Brasington all day these days. There's like a handful. It's like Rob Burbea, the late great Rob Burbea. I feel like right now it's like Rob Burbea and you, and and then um and then like the Bhante Vimalaramsi, the guy who
Mhm.
teaches tranquil wisdom insight meditation, is also uh, very hot right now, to put
Mhm.
it a weird way for meditation stuff. But I want to know, why do you think, why is why is it Leigh Brasington Day all day online in the Dharma spaces? And maybe a relevant adjacent question would be, why is Jhana so hot? Because I mean, I think that's a big part of perhaps the answer of like why is the name of Leigh Brasington on all lips these days in the online spaces? I'm sure it has something to do with the huge, like the sort of rise in popularity of and dominance of Jhana in these online
Yeah,
spaces. So what do you think
yeah,
about all that? That was a messy question, but what do you think?
yeah. I think whatever popularity I have is due to jhana. The fact that I teach it, I wrote a book on it, it's a popular book, people find it helpful. So,
There are other Jhana teachers, including Jhana teachers who have written books. I'm just putting
right,
that out there.
yeah,
It's
but
not Ajahn Brahmawamso Day all day on the Dharma internet. It's Leigh Brasington Day.
right, because what I'm teaching, the subtitle, A Practical Guide to the Jhanas, okay? What I'm teaching is practical. Lay people can go on a retreat, 10 days later, they come out, they've learned a few jhanas. They can actually go home and use those jhanas to enhance their insight practice. So I think that's part of why. Ajahn Brahm, I admire him. He's brilliant, but what he's teaching is not practical. Shaila Catherine's a
Mm,
friend of mine. She's teaching what Pa Auk Sayadaw teaches. It's not practical,
yeah. Okay.
etc.
Mhm.
So what Rob and I are teaching is something that's actually accessible to a layperson who's serious. And
Yeah.
so that makes it a lot a lot more accessible. And so we start showing up there. It blows me away. I mean, I'm just some guy sitting in Oakland, California, write occasional books, teach a few retreats, you know, go hiking, and then how did this happen? I don't even like to write, but
It
somehow
did
it.
happen. You're the Sabrina Carpenter of the online meditation world. Um,
So the
but I think you're, I mean, I think you're, that what you're saying makes a ton of sense. I mean, some people might uncharitably frame that as you and Rob teach lighter jhanas, right?
yeah,
Which
yeah,
is like kind of what you're saying, right? That like Ajahn Brahm won't let you call it a jhana unless all your senses shut down and you can't think, you can't
right,
hear, you can't see. And that's also true of Pa Auk's students,
right.
Shyla Catherine or like Tina Rasmussen. Um, and so it sounds like you feel, and that makes a ton of sense, that it's the combination of the fact that you teach jhana, which is a major source of interest, and that the jhanas you teach are accessible in a non-bananas amount of time. You don't have to be on retreat for a month or two to experience it. Would you say that
Six
that's,
months. Six
sorry?
months. Six
What's six
months
months?
for Pa Auk.
Is that right? That's the minimum?
So someone told me if I wanted to learn Pa Auk's jhanas, I should plan on being on retreat for 6 months. And
Mm.
so I went to the forest refuge before he was coming, spent 2.5 months there practicing concentration before he showed up. And then I had 4 months with him. So I had 6.5 months of working on concentration. I got to his first jhana one time.
Ha.
Okay. I'm pretty good at concentration and still, yeah.
Okay.
Um,
That's interesting because you just gave like a sort of, you just gave like an exchange rate
yeah,
almost between your jhanas, right? It takes Leigh Brasington, you know, like 6 months of Leigh Brasington will get you one Pa Auk jhana. 6 months of being Leigh Brasington, doing Leigh Brasington jhana practice. That's interesting.
yeah. And so 6 months of doing the jhanas I teach and following them up in the same sitting with insight practice will get you a lot further than one experience of Pa Auk. Now, this is
Mm.
me. There were other people on that retreat. There was one guy who did quite well. And there was another woman who got in a couple of times. So out of 25 people trying to learn those jhanas, yeah, three of us got into a jhana. I got in
On
one.
the on extended retreat.
Yeah, on 4 months of retreat.
Hmm.
Yeah. I understand at Pa Auk's monastery, 30% of the monks and nuns can get to the first jhana. This is the people doing it full time. This is
And
not practical.
he doesn't teach insight until you've achieved his jhana. Isn't that right?
That's,
Or
that's correct.
something
That's
like
correct.
that.
Yeah.
Um, Yikes. Yeah. And we've spoken a lot with Beth Upton, who was a nun under Pa Auk. We've spoken a few times with her, and yeah, there is this sense among Pa Auk practitioners that like it kind of like it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that like Pa Auk first jhana at least. Like you can't um like the insight practice, like if you talk to like Beth, for instance, about Mahasi style insight practice, she'll say like, yeah, that's not real. Like you're not going to have real awakening from that. That what you think is stream entry there, for instance, is like a that's not like if you really want to experience nibbana, you got to do it the Pa Auk way. I don't want to put words in Beth's mouth. Let me be clear. This is my recollection slash interpretation of what she said. I do think she basically said that though. And so what you're saying is that it's actually much more accessible than that. Both jhana and liberative insight are more
Yeah.
accessible than that.
Yeah. And now, what I teach on a 10-day retreat, I'm not claiming is the same depth that the
Mhm.
Buddha and the monks and nuns were experiencing, although I can tell you how to get to that, which is stay longer in access concentration, like 2 or 3 hours in access concentration instead of 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so you can get much deeper. But most people don't have time to spend 2 or 3 hours in access concentration to get the jhanas at the level. But at the level I'm teaching is the level I was practicing, and it made a profound difference in my life. My life is so much better. I shudder to think what my life would be like had I not stumbled and literally stumbled into the Buddha Dharma.
Mm.
Uh, you know, I was headed towards being a fat, unhappy, angry guy. And so
Mm.
luckily I moved to California and stumbled into the Dharma. And
Yeah.
it's changed my life, and I understand much more about what's going on. And when things go wrong, I don't freak out as bad as I used to, and I don't make some of the stupid mistakes I used to make. So,
Mm.
yeah, this may not be the best that can be done, but this is what's useful from a practical standpoint.
Hmm. There was, I think it was the meditation teacher Kenneth Folk who once posted a sort of uh, allegory where he talked about the idea of um, people who worship bicycles. And they all day long they learn how to ride bikes. They can do incredible things. They can do wheelies. They can make their bikes do a backflip. They can do all these incredible like BMX, like extreme sports bike tricks. And then, um, but then it's also possible to just use your bike to get to the grocery store, to get to work, to go enjoy a bike ride. And it's like, well, is that not what a bike is for? And so there's an argument that like, um, and I'm not making this argument because I don't know how deep your jhana needs to be. You know, Beth says this is awakening, this isn't awakening. I certainly am not going to contradict anyone here because what the hell do I know? But I like the story. Like one could maybe make the argument that like, yeah, the Pa Auk deep jhanas and this sort of jhanic practice and insight practice is like learning to do the triple backflip on your bike. It's like if you're for the people who are the Olympic athletes and enthusiasts of this stuff, perhaps it is its own reward to be able to do that. But if your goal is to let go of your suffering and be happy, then all you need to do with your bike is ride it to the grocery store. You don't need to know how to do a triple backflip with it. And it sounds like what you're teaching is much more concerned with the sort of getting to the grocery store of spirituality than
Right.
the sort of wheelie triple backflip. Does
Right.
that
Oh,
does that
yeah,
sound?
most people can't do the wheelie triple backflip, no matter how much they practice. It's just not going to be happening. But most people can ride their bike to the grocery store. I'm going to teach you how to ride your bike to the grocery store. They got food there.
Right.
You need.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. So I guess my last question, and we'll drop it, is I have thoughts on this. We talked about this a little bit, and I'd love to get into it again. Um, why do you think jhanas are so popular right now? We talked about how what's sort of trendy, at least in like the online Dharma world, which is an interesting world because you could see the trends move much more clearly because it's like sort of captured in writing through these posts and whatever. And I think things move faster online, so you see
Yeah.
the movement through these cycles. But like, 10 years ago, it was Mahasi practice all day, right? And that was almost certainly because of the looming influence of the inimitable Daniel Ingram, right, in his
Right.
sort of dominance of the online space. Then for a while it was the mind illuminated and Chuladasa, right? And then now it's sort of a continuation of that because that was samatha, that was concentration practice as well. Now it seems like it's jhana. It's you, it's Burbea, and it's these journey guys trying to figure out how to like, stick a thing on your head that's going to make you go into jhana, and leading their sorts of retreats around jhana. Why is it jhana right now? Why do you think?
I don't really know. The theories I would come up with is the mind illuminated. The mind illuminated is good because it lays out a step-by-step practice. So that's why I think it came up. All right, here's what you do. And there's a bunch of stuff you can do, and you got signposts and whatnot, which people love. And so that that became up. And the jhanas appear in there. And then so it just sort of morphed from there into the jhanas.
You
People,
think it
when
was
they come to
TMI?
meditate,
You think the reason for the current popularity of jhanas is the recent popularity of TMI?
it's one of the things it's feeding in. Another is people come to meditation and they're expecting, well, it maybe not be fireworks, but at least a laser light show, right? They
Mm,
want something to go on. And then they hear about the jhanas. Oh yeah, get happy? Yeah, okay. That sounds pretty good. I'd like to do that. So the jhanas have this appeal of, yeah, we do the meditation and we're going to get some short-term benefit that's pretty cool stuff. And so that's a thing that people like. And so they start, looking around and so forth. But why it blossomed at this point, I don't know. The Journey guys definitely are a contributing factor because
mm.
they're attempting to make money off of this. So they're putting their publicity out there. All I do is, say, well, yeah, I'll teach a retreat to you to some retreat center or somebody who wants, to sponsor a retreat. And, I'm not trying to popularize myself or anything. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to teach when I can, write a
You
few
think the
books.
jhana guys are a cause rather than an effect? In other words, you think that their efforts are part of the reason for the popularity of jhanas, not that the
Yeah.
popularity of jhanas is the reason why they're doing what they're doing.
Uh, the, I know I'm doing what I'm doing because I found it really helpful. And I thought, well, if I can help other people do the same thing, maybe they'll find it helpful. And I'm pretty sure that's where Rob Burbea, that's where he was coming from. I know Rob, or I knew Rob, a really
Yeah.
great guy. We lost somebody really, really good.
Mm,
Yeah, his heart and soul were in the right place. He was doing it because he thought this would be helpful. And
mm.
that's why I'm doing it. And it gets turned into this big deal, and it's like, well, okay. Ayya Khema's teacher told her that, I mean, Ayya learned the jhanas from reading the suttas and the Visuddhimagga and taught herself, but she didn't know she was doing them right. So she found a teacher who was recognized as a jhana master, described what she was doing, and then asked, am I doing it right? And he said, yes. And furthermore, you must teach these. They are in danger of becoming a lost art.
Mm,
I'm just trying to prevent them from becoming a lost art by helping out as many people as I can along the way by teaching them.
mm. Little danger of that now, I
But
think, due
we'll
largely to
see.
your efforts, Lee. So I think you should feel good um, about the work that you've done there and the success you've had in that project of preserving this jhana practice. I want to move to. Oh, was there one last thing you wanted to say? I wanted to open up to Q&A rather than monopolize.
Yeah.
Um,
The only thing is, I feel okay. So I'm out there teaching jhanas, and where are all the other jhana teachers teaching at the level I am? I mean, Rob is dead.
mhm.
Uh, Tadasaro Bhikkhu doesn't teach retreats. He's doing his scholar thing. Bhante G is what, 97 years old. He's
He's
not.
old. He's
Yeah.
old.
I'm old. I'm going to get older. I'm not going to do this longer. I'm trying to train people to teach jhanas, and I have trained some folks. But yeah, I'd like I'd like to I'd like for there to be enough jhana teachers out there that they put me out of business so I can go off and retire. That's what I
Mm,
really would like.
here, here. Um, okay, so I want to wrap. I want to just ask first, Lee, do you take one-on-one students? I ask all the teachers that if I remember to.
I do, except right now I'm overwhelmed with one-on-one students,
Okay.
and starting tomorrow, I'm teaching an 11-day retreat. And when that retreat's over, I'm going on sabbatical for 6 weeks and I'm not doing one-on-one students. And when the sabbatical over, I'm teaching another 11-day retreat. So if you want a one-on-one with me, get back to me the 1st of February.
Okay. The reason I ask is because we do like to keep track of the teachers who do one-on-one instruction. We have like a little spreadsheet where we're trying to just keep compile a
Mhm.
list of sort of friends of sit heads that
Yeah,
do one-on-ones. And do you do that on a Donna basis, Lee?
yeah, right.
Would you mind if I add you to that spreadsheet?
You can certainly add me. At the moment, when somebody asks, people find me, they send me an email, they want to do a one-on-one. I send them off to other teachers that
Yeah,
I've
you're at
trained.
capacity right now. That's perfectly fine.
Right.
But it
Yeah, but
sounds like there might be a
yeah,
time in
but
the future where you are taking one-on-ones, maybe not, because you said like sort of reach out in February. So it doesn't sound like you've closed the door on that permanently. So I might sneak you onto the list and just add a note like currently at capacity, something like that,
right. Yeah, that
with
would be good.
permission. Okay.
Right.
All right, let's open it up. Someone did say, one person opined, the reason the jhanas are popular now is because people for many decades experimented with Vipassana only approaches and saw that it's not giving them what they expected. So they realized something is missing in the equation. That is an interesting position that I don't know if I fully agree with as someone who's getting a lot from a Vipassana approach right now and who knows many people who also did. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a large number of people who did find that approach wanting and were
Yeah.
hungry for another approach. So maybe
Yeah.
there's something to that.
There definitely is. I get students that basically are saying, well, my Vipassana practice got really dry, so I thought I'd try and add some jhanas and see if it helped. And generally it does. I mean, you
Lo
got
and
nice
behold.
juicy jhanas now. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's do Q&A. Juan, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'll ask the question quickly. Just it's a pleasure hearing your talk. Thank you very much for your teaching. Um, I actually found out about you and got curious about your teaching because I've been reading some stuff by Ayya Khema, which I do find kind of difficult. I mean, I jumped in with like the thicker books, which may have been a mistake. But the quick question I'd like to ask is, I've read your biography, what you've written on your website about your time, and heard you speak on YouTube videos about your time studying with Ayya Khema. Would you say that the way you teach, whether it's jhana or vipassana, is very different, or had been changed from the way she taught, or maybe adapted to the needs of your students? And if so, how? Like, how do you teach Jhana Vipassana differently? How does it compare to the way she taught you? I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's pretty similar. We do have a few things that are different. Uh, I want more PT in the first jhana than she did. She was quite content with very little PT. She wants more concentration in the fourth jhana than I do. All right. So this a little bit. I mean, for her, it was a steeper thing. For me, I start a little higher, don't quite go as high in terms of the strength of concentration. But it's pretty much the same. And the method I use of saying find a pleasant sensation, I invented that on my own. And I started teaching it when I was assisting her. And so I go in and she's like, what's this thing about focus on the smile, which is the pleasant sensation I was using? And I said, well, that's how I get there. And she sort of shook her head, but didn't say, don't do that or anything. So my method for getting to the first jhana is a little more um, detailed than hers. She's just, have you stay in access concentration until the PT arises. And I'm saying, hey, there's a shortcut here. Focus on something pleasant. The insight practices that I teach are very much the same as what Ayya Khema taught. Some of them are identical. Some of them I've, tweaked it a little bit. But, the five daily recollections, the four elements, Vedana practice, all of this is exactly the same. Um, she never taught, as far as I can remember, the Bahia practice. Bahia, you find that in Udana 1.10. In seeing, there's just seeing, and hearing, just hearing. But I teach that practice. So I'm teaching a few things that she doesn't teach. She taught a few things that I don't teach. But it's similar. And in fact, my teaching is going to be the closest to what she was doing than any other teacher you come across, I think.
one last thing, just I consider myself a relative beginner. I've been practicing a while, but you know.
Is this a second question?
Yeah, well, it's just a fast one. I'm
Well,
cheating, I
but
know.
is it a second question?
Yeah, like I was going to ask for a tip. Is there a tip for beginners in how do you know that you've achieved access concentration? I'll stop right there.
When you're not getting distracted. If you're using the breath, you know each in breath, you know each out breath, and if there are thoughts, they're in the background and don't pull you into distraction.
All right. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Leigh. Next, we have a question that I was asked to ask on someone's behalf, so I'll go ahead and do that. When I intellectually think about the teaching of SODAPI, that is dependent origination, I also to some extent get a grasp on the teaching of karma, especially the this, that conditionality bit. How does karma tie into the teachings of SODAPI in your experience?
Yeah, so the basic teaching on karma is that actions have consequences. The consequences that arise from an action arise via SODAPI. There's an action, it produces more processes, and eventually it results in the consequences of the action. So yeah, dependent origination, karma, SODAPI, all of this is viewing the same thing from slightly different perspectives. The karma perspective is, yeah, so be careful what you do because you will have to deal with the consequences. The dependent origination perspective initially is about, yeah, pay attention so you don't get caught in craving and clinging because that's a setup for dukkha. And the SODAPI is more of a, oh yeah, this is what's going on underneath all of it. But it's just different views into the same thing.
Thank you. I hope that was helpful to the questioner. So I have another question that I was asked to ask. I'm curious for Leigh's thoughts on commentarial / Visuddhimagga based understanding of jhanas versus a sutta-based one. In particular, the way Visuddhimagga style jhanas are so dominant and are not necessarily consistent with what the Buddha said was necessary for awakening.
So, Theravadan Buddhism, which is the preserver of the Dharma in the school that I'm teaching from, Western Vipassana is a general sense. So Theravadan Buddhism is primarily commentarial Buddhism. Okay, it's looking primarily at the Visuddhimagga and the other commentaries. Oh, and it'll look back to the Abhidhamma if that might be helpful. And maybe it'll even get back to the suttas. But the lens of commentarial Buddhism is, yeah, the suttas say exactly what we say in the commentaries. I'm not buying it. Okay, in fact, I'm very suspicious of the commentaries. Yeah, so there's a description in the commentaries how you can get the PT so strong that you can actually levitate and get to some place faster than the people that are walking there. Now, I have a background in science. You know, I haven't seen anybody levitate. Well, yeah, on YouTube, but you can see anything on YouTube. I'm just not buying stuff like that. I grew up as the son of a Presbyterian minister who was a literalist. And so I believe, you know, Daniel in the lion's den, Noah in the ark, all of this stuff. And then eventually it was like, wait a second, this is more Easter Bunny and Santa Claus stuff. And so I rejected it all. And so I'm very suspicious of, you know, people walking in fiery furnaces or any of this other stuff. And if that's what's going on, I get even more suspicious. So yeah, the commentarial stuff, it's interesting. It's difficult reading. I would say that the Visuddhimagga is indeed a very powerful book. If you have insomnia, you just crack the Visuddhimagga open anywhere and start reading. It'll put you right out. But other than that, I do not find it particularly helpful.
Well, fair enough. Very clearly stated. Let's see, we have a lot. There was really a flurry. Like as soon as I said, hey, please send me some questions, about 800 questions just fell on my head. Someone someone asked if you would please discuss the, I never know if it's pronounced asavas or asavas. Um,
Asava.
that would be my guess. It's usually that's
Yeah.
usually where the accent is in Pali, right? So could you speak about those?
Mhm. So three asavas are mentioned, and occasionally a fourth one. When there's three, it's the asava of sense desire, the asava of becoming, and the asava of ignorance.
Hmm.
And the fourth one, when it's mentioned, which is probably in later composed suttas, is the asava of views, which we could fold into ignorance. The word asava gets translated a whole bunch of different ways: taints, cankers, defilements. The correct translation is intoxicants. If you look in the Pali English dictionary at asava, the word literally means the secretion from a plant. Think of a poppy plant. If you cut it with a razor blade, something comes out. You put that on your tongue, you're intoxicated. So, what the Buddha is trying to have us do is overcome the intoxicants. I heard a talk by Eric Kolvig one time, and as part of that talk, he said, Samsara is not a wheel. It's a drunken party in a casino. Our job is to sober up, find the exit, and get out. And what are we drunk on? Sense desires, becoming, and ignorance. So, yeah, we want to overcome those. Sense desires, that's pretty obvious. You're anything coming for your senses that's a pleasure, and we're pursuing them. It's Friday night tomorrow night. Let's go to the club and find some pleasant Vedana. I mean, that's what people are saying. They don't use the word Vedana, but that's what they're after, some pleasant experience. Sense desires, becoming. And becoming, I want to become rich and famous, or it's opposite. I don't want to become sick with COVID, right? And this is running our lives in ignorance, ignoring what's really actually happening. So overcoming the asavas is the same as becoming fully awakened.
Mhm. Thank you for that, Leigh. And part of our work at Sit Heads, we are trying to like sort of integrate meditation with like modern urban life. So I do hope that in the future, when people go out to get tanked, they will say, let's go find ourselves some pleasant Vedana. That I
Right.
hope is our big contribution. So all right, let's see what else we got. Chappelle, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Haley, thanks for coming.
Hi.
You talk about how metta is a practice that you would choose hands down if you had to choose a practice to do for the rest of your life.
Right.
You talk really highly of dependent origination as like, leading to freedom of suffering. So I'm wondering, how does the metta and the dependent origination, how do they play together for you?
So metta is a practice that opens my heart, gets me feeling connected with other people. Uh, Maybe I have more of a tendency to want to help them. And it also concentrates my mind. And all of that is due to the fact that when I'm doing the metta practice, the results of doing the practice, yeah, it sets up this process in my mind of wishing somebody well. So the next time I encounter them, I have a better feeling for them, of maybe helping them and so forth. So the responses down the line that come are dependently generated from the practice that I'm doing. The concentration that arises from doing the metta practice also is arising because, yeah, I got into doing the metta practice. I'm really wishing all of these friends of mine a happy day or whatever I'm doing. I'm thinking of the people in the hospital and hoping they get well, all over. And so all of that is getting me concentrated in the sense that I'm really seriously doing this thing. And so when I stop, I have enough concentration to enter the jhanas. So it's more that metta practice is dependent origination in work, in action. I wouldn't see the dependent origination, wouldn't think about the dependent origination while I'm doing it. I'd have to step back and go, yeah, the reason it works is because of dependent origination. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Chappelle. Thanks, Leigh. See who we have next. Oh, there are a lot. Oh, Laurence. And before I bring up Laurence, I do just want to say a thank you to Laurence, who is our SitHeads guest liaison and helps with the whole process of connecting with and bringing in our wonderful guests. So we can thank Laurence for this conversation even happening. Thank you, Laurence. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question if you'd like to?
Thank you, John. And of course, and Leigh, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Well, your afternoon for you, but it has been a pleasure. It has been really a pleasure exchanging with you also by email. Thank you, John, for the opportunity. And I'm definitely going to get your book there. The question is regarding, I had some experience this summer of some states of absorptions, but in twice. But each time it was on retreat, but a small retreat, few participants. One of the teachers was two teachers, but one of them couldn't be around very often. And after my first absorption, there was something happened, like silence was basically broken. A lot of questions were asked one after the other. And it was very strange. I went into a very negative state.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day I debriefed with the teacher. She said it happened pretty frequently. And then I went into again absorption. And then coming out of the retreat the next day, I encountered a lot of problem that had been sitting when I was away. And again, I went into very deep state of very, very negative. Like now that I'm meditating, I'm rarely getting into these very, very negative states. So I'm trying to, why do they happen? How to handle them? Well, except while sitting, if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I have thoughts and experience on that.
Makes me feel better, actually.
Yeah, I think it's the contrast. You get into a state of absorption, you've really gotten away from all of the craziness, wherever it is, whether it's back out in the world or on the retreat or anything. And you come out and it's back to all the crazy stuff again. And the contrast is so jarring that it really knocks you down. And it may take a little while to get it back together to figure out. So I went off on a retreat for a month from work when I was on disability. And I came back. I'd had surgery on my shoulder, and I came back and I saw the surgeon, and he says, well, time for you to go back to work part-time. So we figured out how to do the part-time, what we're going to do. I was going to be there 3 days a week, for less than 8 hours each day. I think it was a total of 16 hours over the 3 days. So I go back to work and tell them, I'm back. And the HR person says to me, oh yes, the insurance company called. Now, the insurance company was refusing to pay for all my bills. I'd spent $30,000 out of pocket. The insurance company called, and you will be working, 3.5 hours every day. And I lost it. And the poor HR lady, she's like, I'm just telling you what they said. I had to go out and buy her a nice plant to bring in the day. And my friends are all going, you've been on retreat. You're not used to anything going wrong. So the jarring contrast between the state of absorption or being on retreat for a month and coming back and having to deal with whatever you come back to can be enough of a disconnect that you fall into depression, you get freaked out. So yeah, this is what happened.
And it's
Uh,
just a matter of, yeah, watching
yeah,
it happen and
right. So when I teach a retreat, towards the end, I start trying to bring the students back. You know, uh, if it's a long retreat, a month, then we'll start, everybody has to come and talk on the afternoon before the retreat ends. And then some people don't want to come talk. I have to go find them and drag them in there to talk. But I've got to get them talking and get them talking at breakfast the next day. So they're coming in and out because it's going to be jarring. I say, when you go back to the unreal world, it's going to seem like it's very weird. This is because it is very weird. I mean, think about it. We live in a very weird world, and it really strikes you. You've been into a place of sanity.
yeah.
So, yeah. And I also want to say thank you for setting this up. I enjoyed our email
Oh,
conversations very much, and I appreciate it.
oh, that makes me so happy. You are also happy being with us. And thank you for saying that. And by the way, I'm also a scientist and programmer, so we have that in common. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you
It,
for coming. Okay, and
my
for answering my
pleasure.
question. It makes me feel a bit better. Yeah, I just will need to prepare myself if I
Yeah.
get into these wonderful states too. All right,
Right.
let's move on and let's go
Yeah.
through it.
It will probably get easier when you realize that, oh, yeah, I come out and it's really different, and I have to not be attached to where I was and just deal
Yeah,
with
yeah,
it.
that I understand. It's
Yeah.
just it's just that I get more easily disturbed and more easily, yeah,
Yeah.
put off. And it's weird because meditation helped me. I used to be very reactive. I had so many problems, anxiety, and meditation and the Dharma helped me through that, right?
Mhm.
But coming out of absorption makes it come back amplified, but for a short amount of time. But still, it was really strange.
Yeah, yeah. But it's not uncommon at all. And it gets easier because you come back enough and you realize, okay, I can deal with this. Yeah.
All right, I'm just
Thank
going to
you.
slide in to make sure that we have time for one more question, perhaps.
Sorry.
Thank you so much, Laurence, and thank you, Leigh. Um, Melissa, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. So, you mentioned the Pa Auk system, and I've done some retreats with a Pa Auk trained teacher, and that's a system that I've been considering delving into more deeply. So, I was just curious about your experience with it, and I was wondering if you have any reservations about it after having trained in it, aside from it being time consuming. And part of why I ask is if I need to do a 6-month retreat, if I need to do years of retreat, I'm open to doing that down the road. So I was just wondering
Yeah.
more about what your experience was like with it.
Yeah. Pa Auk is a really good guy. I mean, what he's teaching is authentic Dharma. And I'm assuming all of his teachers are also teaching authentic Dharma. I know Shyla is because Shyla's a friend. And I know Steve and Tina are teaching that way. I've seen Beth Upton on YouTube. I've never met her in person. So, yeah, what I know of the teachers, they're teaching authentic Dharma. It's just that it's impractical if you only have a limited amount of time. And so if you're going in, I mean, I don't know who the teacher is, I can't vouch for them, but the odds are quite good that they are an authentic Dharma teacher. Um, some of Pa Auk's interpretations of the Dharma I don't agree with, but that's true for everyone. I don't agree with anybody 100%. So it's not surprising that I don't agree with some of his stuff because, yeah, that's always the case. But I didn't find anything that I thought was wrong. I felt he was teaching authentic Dharma. And I think what he's teaching in terms of the practice, in terms of the deep absorption to where, yeah, you're completely oblivious to everything that's going on. It is a very deep way of getting very concentrated. And when you come out of those states, if you immediately turn to doing insight practice, you will get insights. The one caution I would have is if you're going into it, no expectations. That's what I tell everybody going on any retreat. No expectations. Expectations is the worst thing you could bring on any retreat, but particularly for Pa Auk, since he has such a small success rate in terms of people learning the jhanas.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you, Leigh. Could we squeak in one more? We might have time if it's
Sure.
if it's a short one. Would that be okay? We still have a few minutes.
I'm fine. I got a paper I have to read again. I've already read it once today, and I read it yesterday, and it's my paper, so I'm just trying to clean it up.
Do you want to just wrap now in that
No,
case?
no. I want to answer all the questions, but I know we can't do that for hours here.
Yeah,
let's
but we could probably get in one more. And
Yeah.
then there might be a few that we miss, but that's inevitable. A lot of people had a lot of questions for you, and I'm sorry for anyone who we won't be able to get to. We'll see. Vladimir, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the teachings. I'd like to sort of clear perspective that you give. You talked about perspectives, relative and absolute perspectives. And once one had enough of a sort of stable insight to see the absolute perspective, if one takes that point of view, but then in real life, what seems to tend to happen is that the habits drags one back to start seeing things from the relative perspectives, and therefore being subject to sort of the suffering that is related to that. How do you see the path of transition and where these roles of these perspectives is the way to liberation essentially to remove the relative perspective altogether and just start living from the absolute perspective? Is that even possible?
No.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's not possible. The Buddha, when he ate with his hands. He ate the food. He never ate his fingers. Okay, he does that from the relative perspective. Okay, so you have to operate from the relative perspective to survive in the world. But the trick is to recognize the limitations of the relative perspective and see when you need to move to look at the situation from the absolute perspective. And that's practice. I mean, there's no guideline that I can say other than if you're doing craving and clinging, that's a setup for dukkha. If you find yourself doing craving and clinging, can you step back enough to look at it from a broader, deeper perspective so that craving and clinging can be seen as the useless thing that it is? And then hopefully by that stepping back, you're stepping back into a more absolute perspective, and you can let go of the craving and clinging, thereby preventing the dukkha from arising. But yeah, you can't just move to the absolute perspective. It's not possible to live there, and you can't find freedom living only in the relative perspective. You're going to have to be wise about switching back and forth between them.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Thanks, Vladimir.
We got 4 more minutes. Let's keep going.
All right, Dorothy, would you like to ask your question? Dorothy, go for it, and then we're gonna do one more since Leigh seems game.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi, Leigh. It's so nice to see you again.
Yes.
I guess the question I have is, I just did a month long at the Force Refuge with Guy and Sally Armstrong. Had no idea I was going into Jhanas. I had no idea that I was absorbed or body was disintegrating or anything. And I think it's because, all this time, the Vipassana teachers were basically telling me to ignore the jhanas.
Yep.
Right? And so here I am now, and I'm like, wow, this amazing cool stuff has been happening, and I have like no idea what the language is or anything. I'm really trying to struggle with all of this and don't know how to move forward. So I was going to write you privately too, that maybe
Yeah.
we can talk.
Yeah. So the way to move forward is, yeah, come on a retreat with me and do a retreat. And you'll have some interviews and whatnot. And I actually just put another retreat on my website that's open right now. So it's a Zoom retreat in January. So you might go to my website, click on the schedule, and see if it fits. That would be certainly a possibility. And of course, everybody else is hearing that offer as well. So if you're going to do it quick, because it's going to fill. It just opened up, I opened up another 9 spaces in it, and one of them's already taken. So that's one thing. The other, I mean, I'm not trying to sell you my book, but you know, if you
I've got all of this, I've got all of these, I'm doing Robert Baya, I'm reading all the stuff I can get my hands on. But it's shocking that,
yeah,
I was bored with my practice because nothing was happening, because there's no defilements, no breath, nothing. And I was bored to tears.
yeah. Yeah, it's a shame because there are people stumbling into the jhanas very frequently, and they're not getting the help that they need to know. The teachers don't have to teach them jhanas, just at least say, oh, this seems like it might be a jhana. You might want to go check this out, and give them some references for checking it out. That would be so much better. But yeah, doing what I can, but I can't, push the river.
Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you, Leigh. All right, let's see if we could sneak in this one last question that I was asked to put to you anonymously, Leigh, and then we'll
Sure.
leave you alone and let you read your paper. Here's the question. Dependent origination seems very deterministic. What do the Buddha's teachings say about free will?
The Buddha doesn't say anything about free will or determinism, but he clearly expects you to operate with free will in keeping the precepts. You make the decision, I'm not going to kill, I'm not going to steal, etc. And yeah, some of this stuff is very deterministic. And so I wondered about this, and on a retreat, I actually solved the whole free will versus determinism question.
Oh,
I
good.
mean, completely solved. Is it free will or is it determinism? And the answer is yes. It depends on your perspective. If you look from the relative perspective, what you will see is free will. If you look from the absolute perspective, what you will see is determinism. And you've got to pick the proper perspective. There's a paper on my website about free will versus determinism. Okay? It's actually entitled Free Will, Determinism, and Santa Claus. So the question is, does Santa Claus exist? I mean, if he actually has corporal existence to the North Pole, he's in trouble with all the global warming. I mean, his whole workshop's going to sink down, right? But if you say he doesn't exist, how come 3 weeks before Christmas, if you got a misbehaving 3-year-old, you can go, Santa Claus is watching, and boom, you got perfect behavior. I mean, he doesn't exist, but he just made a 3-year-old stop acting out. How can he do that? And he rides at the end of the parade and he sells Coca-Cola. So does Santa Claus exist or not exist? The whole idea of existence and not existence is a limited view of the world. My sutta, the sutta that I think is the most profound, is in the Connected Discourses. It's Samyutta 12:15, the Kaccayanagotta Sutta. And in there, the Buddha says, this world for the most part depends upon the duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. But one who really sees what's going on sees dependent origination, right? So this is what's going on. And when you look from the perspective of the relative, what you see is free will. I decide that I'm not going to take that because it wasn't given to me. That's my free will. I could have taken it. Okay, that's the relative perspective. From the absolute perspective, you could say, well, I made that decision because I've now dedicated myself to following the Buddha's teachings, and he says to do that, and therefore, that's why I made the decision that way. Now I'm looking from the absolute perspective. But to try to say one exists and the other exists, you're trying to use a duality that really doesn't cover it. What you really need to see is dependent origination, SODAPI. So there you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope that was edifying for the person who asked. And so now we are, I think, ready to wrap. Leigh, I just want to say thank you so much for being here with us. This was an extremely enjoyable conversation for me, and I loved listening to the questions. I hope other people found it beneficial as well. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up, Leigh?
Yeah, I want to say thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your questions. I've totally enjoyed this evening. It's been great.
I'm so glad. So yeah, thanks again for being here. It was absolutely my pleasure, and I think it was everyone's pleasure. And I'll just wrap by saying to all of you who are here with us, and I guess those people watching the video in the future, thank you for your time with us. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your practice. Have a wonderful evening. Good night, everybody.